we have an interesting little juxtaposition here, a contrast between a fine woman, Kathleen Wheeler, and a fine man, Swan Lindman, Hotchkiss-Crawford, both newcomers to the valley, Sweden, Kansas. Just another reminder that we all come from somewhere else, or so many of us. How many locals are there here, people who were born here?
Natives?
Yes, natives. Yes, yay, that's wonderful. One more thing is, in 2 weeks, we'll have a continuation of the speaker series. Chuck Farmer will portray Enos, or he will either portray or talk about Enos Hotchkiss, and Dahlgren Andrews will talk about Martha Savage. The following Saturday, Margaret Deitch and Danny Cotton will fill your ears with talk about Leslie Savage of Crawford. So we invite you to come again and again. The talks we had 2 weeks ago were just wonderful. People enjoy themselves. So without further ado, here is one of Kathleen's daughters, Barbara.
Welcome on this beautiful October 15th and the opening day of the game season, and I wonder where all the guys are. It is a joy for me to be here today and to see many of Mom's friends and so many of my own, and just a lot of good folks. Several people with the museum have spent many hours gathering and documenting information about Mother's contributions during the 50 years she lived in this area. Much of that material is displayed and available for you to read. In addition, many folks knew Mom who were here. They knew her personally, and some of you were a definite plus in helping her accomplish what she did. You already know a lot about her life here. So I decided to slant my words today toward Mom's earlier years, those before she moved to this North Park Valley that she loved. I hope you will have some interest in those 3 decades that helped mold the life of Kathleen Wheeler. And I brought a few little tidbits. I didn't know just what might be up, because I don't come as often as I should to this wonderful museum. But I guess everyone can see those. Everyone but me. I need to see them. This, her papa. Put it better somewhere else. Her papa and her mama. Mom is a baby, a little older, with her brother Kenneth, is a high school graduate, childhood friends. Basketball team, the high school where she was graduated and taught. A skit that she and Daddy gave. The rest is self-explanatory. Her commencement and diploma from high school. Little paper in here, you're welcome to open this up if you want to. Little paper stating that on the commencement program, a reading was given by Kathleen Wheeler. So we'll just, could I just move that back so it's not? Yeah, let's just that's fine. That falls off, I'll know Mom's shaking her finger. The town of Ulysses, one other little in here. If you were ever a student of hers, you may recognize this. She began requiring this little English handbook, grammar handbook, of all seniors, I think the year after I was graduated from Hotchkiss, but she saw to it that she had one in the mail to their daughter at college. And I used it all through college and all the years I taught, and often loaned it to my sweet fellow teacher across the hall when I taught Charla Colson, the daughter of Dave and Ruth Baxter. And this is her book, if anyone wants to peruse through that, thank you, Marilyn, of the letters that the kids wrote for her retirement. And if you begin, it's hard to stop. Oh, one other little item. Grandma Hickok kept me an awfully lot when I was little, and I adored her. Grandpa gave Grandma a bracelet, and it is engraved with her initials E.O. for Ellen Olive, but she was always called Ella. Hickok, the bracelet is beautifully engraved, and I'm so happy to be wearing it. Oh, dear. The town of Ulysses in Grant County, Kansas, is located about 100 miles southeast of Lamar, Colorado. Mother lived there until she was 30 years old. Can you hear me back there? In 1981, 10 years before her death, Mother delved into her Hickok family's genealogy. In addition to much statistical information, Mother wrote a paper in longhand, as she always wrote everything about her family. She briefly mentioned a few ancestors and her grandparents. Mom wrote much more about her own parents and her 4 brothers and 4 sisters who grew to adulthood. This paper, a treasure to me, Mother simply titled Trivia, and in parentheses under that, something that someone might like to read someday. I would like to share a few of those words with you today. Right in the middle of the Civil War, on December 10th, 1963, my father, Charles David Hickok, was born in Missouri, a border state torn by strife and bloodshed. During his childhood, his family moved often throughout western Missouri and eastern Kansas. Eventually, my father enrolled in Kansas University and made an enviable scholastic record there. In 1885, he decided to go west to take advantage of the free land via homesteading. He arrived in Grant County riding a freight wagon during a history-making blizzard. He stayed, thinking that opportunity awaited him. Years later, he was driving my baby and me home during a bad dust storm. He was telling me that he walked 4 miles along this very road to get drinking water for his claim. I knew how deeply he loved Grant County, and I was surprised when I asked him, "Papa, did you ever regret staying here?" And he answered, "Oh, thousands of times." One thing he told me that day was that fortunes are made during the lean years. The prosperous years are the hardest. Also, he said, some of the wisest words ever written are, "Even this shall pass away." So always remember to stand fast and hope and dream, and remember humility and compassion when luck comes your way. He homesteaded alongside his sister Esther. During subsequent years, he helped ramrod the literaries that were the neighbors' nightly socials at the schoolhouse. He gained quite a reputation as a debater, a reader of poems and such. Papa was a scholar all of his life, an avid reader. Although active in community affairs and friendly to everyone, I always felt that he was standing aside, looking at life, trying to figure it all out. He taught himself to read Greek haphazardly after the age of 40. He could add 2 columns of figures simultaneously. His records as county clerk were beautiful and correct. He lived in a dugout and dreamed dreams. As years passed, he helped survey Grant County, served as the first mayor of New Ulysses, and was a benefactor of many through the bank he operated through drought, blizzards, and prairie fires. His very life and ideals are intertwined in the fabric of Grant County. 7 miles south of his claim was a settlement of Irish Catholics, who also had come to file on free land. Among them was a pretty Irish Colleen, Dylan McCall. John Buckles, a cowboy who could waltz divinely and who wore black curls to his shoulders, courted her. But she decided in favor of Charlie Hickok because she felt so safe with him, and she admired and loved him so. Tiny Dylan McCall, my mother, stood 5'2", and was never one to sit quietly. Everyone has told me that she truly was beautiful. She was never a monotone. She had a quick temper that might explode any instant, always followed the next instant by loving remorse. She was bubbling and sparkling and full of fun. How she loved to dance. What a compliment she was to my philosophical, thoughtful father. She never knew an obstacle. She would pull Charles out of the doldrums and forge ahead by brute force and sheer willpower. She was very physical and worked like a slave. Mama was so impulsive. She had a truly generous heart and could never worry her head about finances. She loved babies with a passion. In fact, our whole family loved babies. Mama loved people, all people. She loved to laugh. She had a peasant-like earthiness in her makeup. Certainly, I feel lucky to have had this little Irish mother of mine. And I know you all know the story of Wild Bill Hickok being shot and killed by Jack McCall in Deadwood. And of course, it was a little family joke that Hickok married McCall. After many other pages about brothers and sisters, then came child number 9, Kathleen. In the summer of 1909, the citizens of Ulysses decided to move their town, and they sawed the courthouse and hotel in 2 and moved northwest up the hill. This was a little hill in Kansas, you know. And moved up the hill a few miles and founded New Ulysses, just in time for me to be born on August 31st. My one claim to fame, I was the first recorded birth in New Ulysses. A very simple, mediocre life unfolded in sequence. A happy childhood, a satisfying marriage, and 2 adorable baby daughters. And years, and years, and years of teaching school. Perhaps a grad sort of existence from some viewpoints, but to me, it's been a life full of blessings and happiness and lots of fun. I'm going to jump for a minute or 2 to the mid-1940s. Mother enrolled in a correspondence course in creative writing. For part of one assignment, she wrote a short selection about 3 little girls who were childhood friends. 2 of them were an only child, unlike the third, whose family numbered many. Shortly after Christmas Day each year, The three would go to each other's homes to see the presents under the trees. In Mom's writing, one little girl had just welcomed her friends and their beautiful new dolls into her home. Mother writes, "Suddenly my own gifts seemed small and tawdry. I grew ashamed and I wanted to be alone so that I might release the tears that kept pushing at my eyelids. Finally, they left. As I closed the door behind them, my father laid aside his paper. He said, 'Aren't their dolls beautiful?' And the hot tears gushed. He took me gently on his lap, held me against his breast, and cut my wet cheek in his warm hand. He continued quietly, 'But Marjorie and Elizabeth aren't nearly as lucky as you are. Just think, you have a real little baby sister to play with.' And right then and there, my scale of values took on a perspective that has lasted to this day." I might mention the two little girls with her in the picture were named Marjorie and Elizabeth. At the age of 8, Mother had a severe appendicitis attack. They took her as quickly as they could to the hospital at either Garden City or Dodge City. Before they reached there, Mother's appendix had burst. She spent some weeks in the hospital with surgeries and drain tubes, but lived. When Mother was 11 years old, her oldest sister died a few days following the birth of her third child. So, a new baby boy was lovingly welcomed into the Hickok family for several years. You already know about women's hard housekeeping work of days long gone by. And as a girl, I'm sure Mom knew a lot about it firsthand. Scrubbing clothes on a washboard, ironing with the heavy side irons, never-ending cooking and dishes to do, and the care of the younger ones. Mother must have enjoyed her high school years. She participated in various speech competitions such as debate and dramatic readings, was a member of the girls' basketball team, and still found time for fun. A new high school had just been completed 2 years before Mom was graduated in 1926. Ellie asked me if I had a dress or something of Mother's I might bring, and I said, I don't, and I so wish I had one particular one. It was her flapper dress from the 1920s. And it was a real beauty, kind of a soft peachy rose color and little tiny glass beads around the neck and lining on those, what do you call those long dangly things that hang at the bottom of the flapper dress? Maybe flappers, I don't know. Anyway, and I just might mention that, yes, Mom knew how to dress. College years followed. Mother enrolled at Kansas State in Manhattan. During her first year there, she had pneumonia and a threat of TB. The doctor recommended a drier climate, so Mom transferred to New Mexico University at Albuquerque. She really liked school there. She was elected to mortar board, served as president of her sorority, was part of various campus activities, and made lifelong friends. Mother majored in English and minored in archaeology. She was graduated from NMU in the spring of 1930, and that summer she married Lemoyne Wheeler on August 5th. Libby was born in July 1931, and I arrived in August 1933. The 1930s, the Depression and dust storms. Some of you who have heard Abbott Fay speak about the Dust Bowl days will remember his comment, "There was no God west of Saline, Kansas." When Libby and I were little girls and needed to leave the house for a length of time, Mom always took a gauze mask, such as doctors used to wear, would tuck it in our pockets, just in case a duster rolled in. Jobs were almost non-existent, and our little part of the world had turned to dry, rolling dirt. Mom began teaching at the English at the high school. I seem to remember she said her starting salary was $67 a month and was sometimes paid in script. Does that sound familiar, Laura? She said some boys were taller than she was and 2 were older, but teach all students she did, and they were recognized with respect during their speech and dramatic competitions throughout southwestern Kansas. The Kansas Association of English Teachers had a meeting in Dodge City in 1937. Mother was asked to present a paper on the value of the English classics. Her paper began with these words: "The adolescent boy or girl with whom we come in contact in our English classes is not preparing to live life, but is living life in its most delicate and portentous period. At the same time, adjustments must be made, philosophies formed, ideals set up, and leisure time habits developed. We cannot lose sight of the value of our contemporary literature in aiding and guiding the student in the arduous task of fixing his scale of values. The contemporary author speaks the same modern speech and expresses present-day viewpoints, attitudes, and beliefs. However, the contemporary literature takes on perspective and beauty when studied in comparison with the early classics." And then Mom gives examples of authors of the classics and notes their values in their writings. One paragraph especially caught my eye because this paragraph was written in 1937. She writes, "Reading the classics enlarges the student's horizon. It broadens the viewpoint, instills a spirit of tolerance and appreciation, and gives us a cognizance of beauty. The student of today can hardly be completely surprised at Hitler's treatment of the Jews if he has observed a similar situation before in Ivanhoe. Ivanhoe stands the test of a true track classic in that it reveals to us that there are lovely Jessicas and honest moneylenders among the Jews as well as among the Gentiles. By absorbing the vast panorama of life that the English classics give us, the youthful mind expands so that it can never entirely shrink back to its former confines." In 1938 and 1939, our family spent part of the summers on 25 Mesa in Colorado, where Daddy had a job at a sawmill. The first summer we lived in a very old, very rustic two-room log cabin. It had been used as a shelter cabin for cowboys riding herd. Its old plank-covered doors were scarred with carvings. Initials, names, dates, and even snowing like hell. In later years, when Mom was taking her correspondence course, she wrote a wonderful paper about the cabin. She used first-person personification as though the cabin itself were telling the story. In 1940, just after school was out, Mama, Daddy, Libby, and I moved to this valley in Colorado. Our rented home for nearly a year was just west of the Van Ort place on the other side of LaRue Creek. Mother spent most of that summer taking care of me. In June sometime, I broke my upper right arm. Dr. Gould had Daddy make a traction rig for me, and I wasn't allowed to move from a flat bed for almost 2 months. So Mom had a full summer, but somehow found time to look for a teaching job. She was hired to begin teaching that fall at Stewart Mesa. The following spring, we moved to our happy longtime home at Bell Creek. In the early years there, how much Daddy, Libby, and I loved the winter nights when Mother would read aloud to us the continuing chapters from the book before she needed to start grading her students' papers. Mother wasn't a gossip, and as far as I know, she never betrayed a confidence. Students must have talked with her about many things. One time, several years down the road, a former student and I were chatting. The lady said, "And oh, Barbara, you know the time I talked with Mrs. Wheeler when I was thinking about running away from home." And I interrupted her and truthfully answered, "No, I don't know a thing about that." Once, Mesa College offered Mom a teaching position there. She opted to stay at Hotchkiss High School. I don't think Mom ever went out looking for something to do. Folks would come to her to help get something started. Mom greatly appreciated her friends and neighbors, fellow teachers, wonderfully supportive parents, the help and hard work of community and outlying club members, and the hundreds and hundreds of students who enriched her world. And no, Mom never finished her correspondence course. She was too busy to complete the many assignments in the allotted length of time. I think she was rather like the students she wrote about in her classics paper. She wasn't preparing to do creative writing, she was living it. In closing, I would like to borrow the exact words from which Mother ended her family trivia paper. "Perhaps it is a mistake to have written this paper. Certainly in retrospection, it is a frustration. There is so much more that I would like to tell, and no doubt I have said many things poorly. Of course, it is opinionated. I ask that you read it with love and forgiveness. In that spirit, it was written. Kathleen Wheeler, August 1st, 1981. And thank you.
It was informative and moving. How many of you were one of Kathleen's students? How fortunate you were. Does anyone have a story, an anecdote that they would like to share?
I have one.
Not you, Margaret.
I do have one. Oh, I'll just sit down.
Yeah.
One time. I wore the dress in a style show. And of course I had to learn to do the charts. Because she said she had charted some many miles in that dress. Well, it was a show up at Crawford where we had old time dresses, and things like that, people had worn. And anyway, I got out on the stage and proceeded to Charleston, and evidently I wasn't just real good at it because my husband said Leslie Deal looked like he'd go, "Oh, I was chair laughing."
I knew the dress was always kept in Mom's great big old costume trunk, but I had hoped sometime it had really been able to shimmy on stage, and it did.
Look in books and so forth, and I talked with Kathleen a little bit about it, and she said, "Come over and I'll show you." And I said, "No, he is the one that wants to." So Phil was over, and he and Kathleen did all of this Dear Me, and she taught him how. But do you know, after he showed me, and Kathleen with a little bit of help, also helped me, but he never did it again. But the Dear Me was just delicious. I could not believe how good it was. And I did have to learn how to prepare wild game because we didn't come where there was any that I could prepare. And I remember also, after Kathleen's help, Jack Kent said, "Be sure and have him bone everything out." And so I went back to Kathleen and she gave me some more tips. But she was a great, great friend and we enjoyed knowing her for many, many years.
I'm Dorothy Dunfelder, I was Dorothy Tracy. I think the thing that I can think of is probably one of the most important things in my high school years was our senior Girl Scout group. And Mrs. Wheeler was our leader for all those years. We would cook hamburgers down at the park at the fair time, and we'd raise money. And then we'd take just a truck, not a camper or anything, put benches in it, put our sleeping rolls in there. And we had a big flour can. We'd put a bunch of stuff and cookies and stuff. We'd take off in the summer, and one year we went to Carlsbad Caverns. And one year we went to Yellowstone. One year we went to Boulder Dam. And there were probably maybe 10 or 12 of us. We went all through high school together with Ms. Wheeler as our leader in Scouts. It was great.
My name's John Taylor. I'm son of Marvin and Doris Taylor, and my grandparents, John W. and Hazel Taylor. My Uncle Clifford and Aunt June were in the area. And I was a student of Kathleen in 1964 and 1965, and she was already an institution and quite an inspiration for all of us students back then. And I brought a paper that she required us as seniors to write a journal or something, and we had to come up with a name and write something every week. And mine was John's Journal, and I wrote a story about a cat named Murphy that was on our farm, and this cat got in all kinds of troubles and everything. But the part that inspired me the most from Kathleen is she wrote a little bit on the end of it. She gave me an A, by the way. Dated February 9th, 1964. And she wrote, "Sometimes I wonder if you shouldn't be a professional writer!" Exclamation mark. "You certainly have an enviable gift of expression straight from the shoulder, diplomatic or humorous. I thoroughly enjoy your columns. This one is a dilly." That has inspired me to do some writing over the years, and now that I'm retired from teaching, which was also an inspiration from Kathleen, the future teachers of America, I'm starting to think more that I should be doing more writing. thanks to her inspiration.
And we traded back and forth, but I think I didn't realize until I started teaching myself about the breakfast that lady would prepare for us before we all went to school on the school bus, and she would go, of course, separately, but we'd have a breakfast like I don't even fix today. And it was just amazing. But the things that I really remember about her was that my family was, you know, we all loved one another, but we didn't show it so much. And when I'd go to Barbara's house, Mrs. Wheeler would tuck us in and kiss us goodnight. Oh, I just looked forward to that. And then in the morning, she'd call us to get out, and she'd say, "Girls, come a-jumping," and you just felt like you jumped. But the best thing was she could braid hair and never pull the hair. And my mother, anyway, the whole family, they were just such a big part of my bringing up. I just loved every minute of it.
And Chirp's mom was my other mother. I'm going to throw something, a couple of things out. She was my Brownie Scout leader out at the Bell Creek house, and I remember in the evening and we were doing s'mores. I think that's the first and last time I've ever eaten those, but I thought they were wonderful. And then I've just been amazed, they took at least one young man in.
Usually not in some of them, but this
Yeah, and
wonderful boys. Jim Thomas was there for years.
you just can't say enough about outside of her teaching. I unfortunately didn't go to high school here, didn't have that, I wish I had. And I remember my cousin, Dick Hotchkiss, who hopped the train and rode it, I don't remember how far, but she was here to tell me. And then hopped off, and it sounded like a big story. He wrote this paper, and Kathleen believed him. He got an A. He still remembers that. He said he actually did. He didn't make it up. He was very proud of himself.
John?
I'm John Burritt, I recognize Jerry Walker. I'd like to give you an example of Mrs. Weaver's writing ability. She wrote a poem for a junior-senior prom, and I was to deliver it, which I did flawlessly. Something that helped me win her hand later on. I haven't practiced this for years, and I freely even try, but with your permission, I'll give it a shot. On the breast of the Rocky Mountains, in the world as young and gay, a vigorous river tumbled and laughingly lost its way. It mounted the North Fork Valley in the mighty mountain's breast, and filled it with emeralds and stardust, a paradise of the west. Its hillsides of rainbows of flowers, bluebirds flash in the sun, rainbows leap from its sparkling streams, in its heaven, the great heaven. Strong men came and people of the valley, with struggle, strain, and stress, and out of their yearning and striving came our beautiful HHS. So the river looked up and was happy in the knowledge of work ever done, holding fast to its hope, for it had great faith in the classic up to one. In the year of our Lord, 1939, in the mighty September heat, a senior set out on a perilous voyage. Banners flying under full sail. They steered around snags and ragged. They rode out flash and storm. They sailed over waters with forehead and blue, under stars that were sunny and warm. Reached that point.
John, I bet it was something about they made the safe harbor. Say the last verse of it. I'm not a. I wouldn't be a something, I wouldn't be a king.
I wouldn't be an airplane. I wouldn't be a king. I'd rather be a singer and rather be a king.
Teacher is excellent. When she'd say, okay kids, we're going to do poetry, we go, and then she'd start in the poem and whatever it was, Rudyard Kipling, or you lived it and you loved it. And she did have a tremendous impression on me, but besides all that, on this community, she really worked hard, she and Lemoyne both, on the Cowboy Carnival. that ended really with Memorial Hall. Without her help and guidance, we wouldn't have Memorial Hall. Without her help and guidance, we wouldn't have this historical society. And June Taylor was another one. That was incredibly the beginning of it. And then she really worked hard on the arts and humanities. Remember, she hosted a dinner and she had, what was the guy from? I'm sorry, who remembers who she
Will Gear.
Will Gear.
Yeah,
So
Will
that
Gear.
picture didn't really fit in, I didn't mention it. I thought maybe the museum had that.
She had Will Gear at her house and John Boy, and that was the beginning of the arts and humanities, the Norfolk Council on the Arts and Humanities. But she really helped this historical society. Started it, kept it going, kept us. She was just the backbone for many, many years. But what she's done for this community is tremendous. But when I think of the outreach from all the you people who became teachers, and all of us who love literature and poetry, from her example, is tremendous. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill. I was embarrassed.
But
I taught at Hotchkiss High School for 30 years or so, right across the hall from Mrs. Wheeler. And anytime I'd go by her classroom, all the kids would be quiet, listening to her or doing something. Then I'd go into my room and they were all like, there's one of them. It took me a long time to figure out what the difference was. And I finally decided that they enjoyed listening to what she had to say, but they weren't too interested in what I was saying. She was quite
More?
I don't really have a story in a sense, but I've always marveled at what she achieved and agree with all that they've said here. And she was a marvelous individual and was a very good friend of mine too. So she worked very diligently at the church too and their activities. Greatly appreciated. We all need to rejoice and praise God for her blessings she brought to us.
Thank you. It's time to stand up and stretch.
Up there by their first name. I guess because of that.
You know, after we finish start college classes.
While we're gathering, I have a statement that I forgot to mention. As you were coming in, I noticed some of you looking at our tile wall, the completed one and the incomplete one. There are, I think, about 10 spaces left on the new tile wall, on this wall, the wall on your left as you leave. So if you're interested in buying a tile, it costs just $100. And you have forms to fill out where you can take home to think about, what kind of wording you want to put on the tile. And for those of you who peruse the big tile wall, you'll notice that people are putting in names on their own names or messages or names of as a memorial, whatever occasion you might want to honor, or person you want to honor. So if you are interested in getting in the last 10 tiles, please speak to one of us and get a form, because we're going to do those 10 in a batch, in the last batch, and that'll be it. Here is Dennis. Without whom I just have to say this. Without Dennis and Laura, this museum would not be what it is today. The yard, The land around the building is tidy, the lights work. Anything that we can think of that we need, it's, let's call Dennis. And he takes care of it.
But
Most of those, and Mrs. Wheeler's is a hard act to follow.
but Dennis told me he's not nervous.
Well,
Too much, maybe.
Swan Lindman was my grandfather. He was born in Sweden, a town on the southern end of Sweden called Willefall, Jameshall, Sweden. Weird name, right? His name was Sven Swanson. He was born October 1st, 1866. He was the oldest of 5 sons and 5 daughters. He came to America in 1886, on April the 27th, the age of 20. When he went to the immigration office, the officer told him, we've already got too many Swansons here. You're going to have to change your name. So he changed it to Swan Lindman. And nobody really knows where he came up with that name. The first thing Swan did when he got there is he went to a store and bought an apple or a cherry pie. Couldn't find an apple, so he got a cherry. He went down and sat down on the curb, started eating it, and he forgot to pit the cherries. So he spit them out in the street. Policeman came by and told him he was going to have to pick them all up and put them in the trash can. So that was his first experience when he hit the United States. We don't know how long it took him to get here to Colorado, but the reason he came to Colorado is because he had some relation here, which we'll discuss a little later. But he came and he worked in the mines in Telluride, Silverton, and Ouray. He had 2 other brothers, Niles, that came here a little later, and Olaf. And they all worked in the mines around that area. And then Swan decided he didn't want to do all the mining all his life, so he came over to Crawford and bought John Olson's homestead in 1896. And John was Swan's nephew. That's where he had the connection to come to Colorado. I don't know who took care of the farm for a little while, because Swan spent all his money buying it, and then he had to go back to the mines for a while. Well, he worked there until a little later, then he came back to Crawford. He worked on his farm for a while, and on February 24th, 1901, he married Sarah Dove. And the Dove family had a colony just below the Olson family, there below Crawford. And he married her in 1901. Several years later, he got a message that on February 28, 1902, his other brother Olaf was killed in the snowslide at Liberty Bell Mine in Telluride. It was one of the worst disasters that Telluride had ever seen. 19 miners were killed and several other people were injured. In 1905, Swan built, when he first moved there, Sarah and then just lived in John Olson's little cabin down below. He had 2 of them. One of them's still there today. The other one was made out of cedar. They tore it all down, and some fences up there is made out of that cedar. In 1905, he built a nice farmhouse for his family. Well, he lived in that for a good many years, but later on, in 1993, that house was moved through Crawford to the east entrance of the Crawford Cemetery, and it stands there today. This gentleman in this picture was a young man that came to live with Swan and Sarah, and he stayed with them and was just more or less part of the family for years. Swan was instrumental in the Picker Ditch. He didn't help build it, but he was later on the Picker Ditch board. Some of the members decided that they needed a mill in Crawford. So some of the farmers around here first established the Crawford Mill. At that time it was called the Crawford Mill and power plant. Well, it wasn't too long ago they decided the Clipper ditch didn't have water the year round, and the water in the winter froze and couldn't run the water wheel. So they had to get an alternate power for the mill during the winter, so they scrapped trying to make electricity out of the mill. A few years later, the Lund brothers bought the mill. Merle ran the mill in Crawford, his brother ran the one in Peonia. Then later, Merle decided to go join his brother in Peonia. And probably some of you remember Charlie and Maxine Birch took over the mill. While Vaughn was on the water board, he was attending a meeting in Grand Junction in one of the buildings down there. He needed to go to the restroom. He asked somebody where to go. They told him, and he kind of got confused. And how he got the door open, nobody knows, but he just kind of opened the door and stepped in, and he fell down an elevator shaft. They were just starting to build. It was just a short ways, about 10 feet, and he landed in some lumber, and he injured an arm and his shoulder, and he lost an eye. And when I was just a little child, I can remember him when we'd go there for family dinners or Christmas dinners, taking his eye out and putting it back in. That was fascinating. But he always said it hurt too bad, and he always wore another patch. And during those times, he would sing Swedish Christmas songs. And we tried, everybody tried to get him to teach us Swedish. And he said, no. Very specific, no. You're in America, you speak English. That's kind of completely said today. In 1920, Swan decided he would run for county commissioner of District 3, which includes Crawford, Hotchkiss, and Peonia today. But there was quite a few people living around this area at that time because he was defeated by Mr. Burritt by 1,988 votes against 1,697. In the 1930s, Swan was on the school board. And he happened to be on the school board when my mother graduated in 1932. And he signed her diploma. There's also a lady's signature on it that probably some of you know. Helen McKisson. Well, while Swan and Sarah was on the farm, they raised peaches, apples, but they were like all farmers. They learned they couldn't depend on fruit for a crop. So they started raising hogs and milking cows. And they sold cream to the creamery in Crawford, the North Fork Creamery, which later, when it disbanded, there was one here in Hotchkiss called the Creamery. Within the day, it's the Creamery Art Center, the same building. Swan also built this packing shed where when he was doing his orchard and everything, it still stands on the ranch up there today. In fact, I just took this picture a couple of years ago. Swan passed away in 1952, and at that time, Oscar was already started to raise his family, living on part of the ranch where Lila and Bill Lindman live today. And Swan was buried in Crawford, and Sarah and Olaf and Eddie decided they would run the rest of the ranch as long as they could. And sometime later, they finally gave it up, and Oscar's oldest son, Dale, took over. He and Bertha Ann took over the ranch. Eddie came to Hotchkiss to live with my Uncle George. He had a house right here behind Memorial Hall, right with the library. And Olaf and Sarah moved to Crawford. They had a house that was just north of Buford Chrysler and just east of Sewell Warren. Some of those names you probably remember. During all this time, Niles, when he went back to Sweden, for some reason they thought he was going to come back and help Swan on the ranch. He went back to Sweden, started raising a family, and his youngest daughter married a man by the name of Carl Wedo. And they had a son and a daughter. The son was like those people, they were interested in what happened to his grandfather's brothers who was here in America. So he started writing letters to all the post offices around in Colorado. And one day a letter arrived in Crawford when Clifford Wilking was the postmaster there. And he gave it to Oscar, who had retired and moved to a house in Crawford. And he gave it to my mother. And she started corresponding with Ben, and over the years, Ben got married to Irene in 1979. They decided they'd spend their honeymoon in the United States. So they came to the United States. They got on buses, visited all the interesting points, and ended up in Delta just the day before the 4th of July. We picked them up there and showed them around. Took them to Durango, where my Aunt Goldie lived. They caught the bus, went on to California and back to Sweden. Okay, in 2009, they decided they'd have a 30th wedding anniversary and come to the United States again. Well, this time the buses didn't run like they did then, so they had to fly all around. They arrived in Grand Junction the day before the 4th of July. We picked them up, and on the 4th of July, we had a family reunion over here at the Senior Center. There was always, more than 20 spouses and cousins and everything were there. That same year, in September 6th, 2009, my mother passed away. She was the last living child of Sarah and Swan Lindman. Any questions? I've got one.
Oh.
I keep getting asked, well, maybe some of you want to know, how were the Lindmans and the Olsons related? Well, it's not too long of a story. Swan's mother was named Hannah, Benjamin's daughter. Everybody had either a son's daughter or John's son, something like that. She was married to a gentleman of John Nelson. Now, they had 4 children. Benjit, John's daughter, was Swan's mother. She was the 4th child born in that family. She was the only girl. She was born in 1846. Her father drowned on Christmas Eve, 1848. In 1950, Hannah, this is Swan's daughter's mother, remarried a gentleman by the name of John Olson, and they had 10 more children. All sons. All sons. So Swan's mother was a daughter of 10 stepsons of the Olsons.
Oh, my goodness.
Out of those 6 of them came to the United States, and their father John came to the United States, and that's who Swan bought his land from. But they had 14 children.
Would Charlie Olson have been in that family somehow? Remember, they live up where the valleys.
Yeah.
Charlie and Hannah.
Of all of those that came here, they were buried on Olson Mesa at that time. And I thought Jean Clark would come down today, but she didn't make it. But out of all that family, they were buried there. She later moved all their stones to Crawford. But in that family, there's another Olaf. She married some lady there and had a family and raised, and she had a daughter, Agnes. So you remember Agnes? She married Henry Cry. And Henry Cry had a family, and then Jean was that part of that family, and it was Jean Clark. She married Marvin Clark, who hauled cream from that valley for many, many, many years.
I think Charlie Olson is buried at the Hotchkiss-Crawford.
I think so, yeah.
Yes, I know.
I think he was an uncle or something of that.
Must have been a relation. I sometimes wondered how they happened to come here.
I've got a list of everything, and you probably mentioned there about, went on and on and on and on. But we tried to find Olaf's grave over in Telluride. He's buried in Willow Tree Cemetery. And we talked to the guy, and he said, well, he lost part of the records. He said, you know, over the years, we've had mudslides, snowslides, practically every year, and everybody's tombstone ends up down here. We don't really know where to put them. So we just kind of don't bury anybody there anymore.
I don't know about, Charlie Olson was actually my grandmother's brother, Amanda Poltine.
Okay.
And so that's what
Yes.
brought her here, was her brother, I think, was here, so I'm not sure
Already
it's
before
part of
your
it.
grandma,
Yeah.
before your grandma?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure,
Uh-huh.
so, and she came in 1902, I believe,
Okay.
but she was only 19 at that time, so I think it's a different Olson.
There's some more Swedish people here too. Did you say you had some people in Sweden?
Yes, yes. Yes, we, my grandfather, Gus Peterson, came from Sweden. And they were friends with the Olsons and the Hultines, and they used to all get together with their big dinners and talk Swedish. But they didn't let the children talk Swedish. They said, just like you said, you're in America now and you'll talk English. And I know my dad didn't know any words in Swedish, and yet his parents talked back and forth among themselves and their friends in Swedish. And I never learned. And so my son and daughter-in-law decided that we needed to all go back to Sweden. In 2000, we went back, and we went to the immigration center there, not having known